The most dangerous truth is the one they tell you is a lie. Listen closely. The power structure you obey, it wasn't built on faith or freedom. It was built on the meticulous suppression of a single emotion, desire. The moment that desire, pure, raw, and defiant, threatened the mechanism, the entire system activated to crush it. You're about to hear the real, unedited story of the Thornton family in Savannah. Not the official record, not the cleaned-up whispers, but the raw data of a system in collapse. It starts not in a battlefield, but in a quiet room with a page, a pencil, and the unsanctioned education of a 9-year-old boy. James Bennett was property, a ledger entry. But to Elizabeth Thornton, the mistress of the house, he was an intellectual mirror, a mind that absorbed knowledge with a hunger she recognized in herself, a hunger the world had told her to starve. It's not a love story. This is a story of transgression, the deliberate, conscious act of stepping across a line society had declared impenetrable. Every lesson she gave him, every word, every sum, every poet she shared, was a deliberate hammer blow against the rigid architecture of her world. Every whispered verse of Byron was a coded act of revolution. She was not just teaching him to read, she was teaching him to see. And what he saw, what she saw in him, was a flaw in the master plan, the simple, irrefutable reality of shared humanity that transcends any legal or social decree. They told us history is a timeline of events. I tell you, history is a record of secrets kept. This secret, hidden beneath the polite veneer of Southern gentility, was a time bomb. They feared the passion, yes, but they terrified of the proof that the entire ideology of their power was fragile, an elaborate lie that could be undone by two people daring to think and feel outside the prescribed boundaries. Her husband, Richard Thornton, died, and the entire house, the entire structure of control took a breath it was never meant to take. That pause, that single year of mourning was the window. The moment of vulnerability the system would eventually close, but not before they made their move. The system is designed to correct anomalies. They were the ultimate anomaly, and the correction was coming. The danger wasn't the affair itself, it was the radical shift in identity it represented. Elizabeth, the sheltered matriarch from one of George's oldest families, was shedding her designated skin. She was morphing from a chattel of the patriarchy into an agent of choice. And James Bennett, the enslaved house servant, was transforming from property into a co-conspirator, a man with the future he was actively building. One word at a future he was actively building. One word The legal and social framework of the time relied on absolute ironclad definitions. White, black, master, slave, man, woman. These lines were the bedrock of institutional power. The relationship shattered those lines, not quietly but demonstrably through the brazen act of marriage. Think about the sheer audacity. They didn't flee first and then marry in the North. Elizabeth secured his freedom papers, and then, in the heart of the beast, the parlor of the very house built on their separation, she married him. This was more than a personal act of love. It was a political manifesto shouted into the silence of Savannah society. It was a calculated, lethal insult to every man who profited from the system, every woman who endured it, and every judge who upheld it. The response was not merely shock or disapproval. It was a systemic retaliation. The city council's emergency session, the expunged minutes, William Thornton's immediate petition to declare his stepmother mentally incompetent. This was the power structure mobilizing to erase the evidence of their vulnerability. They had to destroy the living, breathing proof that their system was flawed, that the designated inferior could be the chosen equal. Judge Henry Thornton, the pillar of the establishment, recusing himself, but writing privately to the governor for intervention that shows the level of panic. This was not a local scandal. It was a perceived national security threat to the ideology of institutional control. The whisper of this single event, the marriage of Elizabeth and James, had the power to destabilize the entire Southern economic and social model. And in that moment, when the torches surrounded the house, the power shifted one last time. Elizabeth, shotgun in hand, on the porch of her estate, defending her choice and her man. She was a woman who had finally claimed her own power, and it was a terrifying, beautiful thing to behold. That defiant stand, before the inevitable retreat, is the true beginning of their myth. They forced the system to show its hand, to reveal its true face, a mob armed, terrified, and fundamentally weakened by the single pure force of will. The most dangerous truth is the one they tell you is a lie. Listen closely. The power structure you obey, it wasn't built on faith or freedom. It was built on the meticulous suppression of a single emotion, desire. The moment that desire, pure, raw, and defiant, threatened the mechanism, the entire system activated to crush it. You're about to hear the real, unedited story of the Thornton family in Savannah. Note officiel record. Not the cleaned-up whispers, but the raw data of a system in collapse. It starts not in a battlefield, but in a quiet room with a page, a pencil, and the unsanctioned education of a 9-year-old boy. James Bennet was property, the ledger entry. But to Elizabeth Thornton, the mistress of the house, he was an intellectual mirror, a mind that absorbed knowledge with a hunger she recognized in herself, a hunger the world had told her to starve. This is not a love story. This is a story of transgression, the deliberate conscious act of stepping across a line society had declared impenetrable. Every lesson she gave him, every word, every sum, every poet she shared, was a deliberate hammer blow against the rigid architecture of her world. Every whispered verse of Byron was a coded act of revolution. She was not just teaching him to read, she was teaching him to see. And what she saw in him, was a flaw in the master plan, the simple, irrefutable reality of shared humanity that transcends any legal or social decree. They told us history is a timeline of events. I tell you, history is a record of secrets kept. This secret, hidden beneath the polite veneer of Southern gentility, was a time bomb. They feared the passion, yes, but they terrified of the proof that the entire ideology of their power was fragile, an elaborate lie that could be undone by two people daring to think and feel outside the prescribed boundaries. Her husband, Richard Thornton, died, and the entire house, the entire structure of control, took a breath it was never meant to take. That pause, that single year of mourning, was the window, the moment of vulnerability the system would eventually close, but not before they made their move. The system is designed to correct anomalies. They were the ultimate anomaly, and the correction was coming. The danger wasn't the affair itself, it was the radical shift in identity it represented. Elizabeth, the sheltered matriarch from one of George's oldest families, was shedding her designated skin. She was morphing from a chattel of the patriarchy into an agent of choice. And James Bennet, the enslaved house servant, was transforming from property into a co-conspirator, a man with a future he was actively building. One word at actively building. One word at the legal and social framework of the time relied on absolute ironclad definitions. White, black, master, slave, man, woman. These lines were the bedrock of institutional power. The relationship shattered those lines not quietly, but demonstrably through the brazen act of marriage. Think about the sheer audacity. They didn't flee first and then marry in the north. Elizabeth secured his freedom papers, and then, in the heart of the beast, the parlor of the very house built on their separation, she married him. This was more than a personal act of love. It was a political manifesto shouted into the silence of Savannah society. It was a calculated, lethal insult to every man who profited from the system, every woman who endured it, and every judge who upheld it. The response was not merely shock or disapproval. It was a systemic retaliation. The City Council's emergency session, the expunged minutes, William Thornton's immediate petition to declare his stepmother mentally incompetent. This was the power structure mobilizing to erase the evidence of their vulnerability. They had to destroy the living, breathing proof that the system was flawed, that the designated inferior could be the chosen equal. Judge Henry Thornton, the pillar of the establishment, recusing himself, but writing privately to the governor for intervention that shows the level of panic. This was not a local scandal. It was a perceived national security threat to the ideology of institutional control. The whisper of this single event, the marriage of Elizabeth and James, had the power to destabilize the entire Southern economic and social model. And in that moment, when the torches surrounded the house, the power shifted one last time. Elizabeth, shotgun in hand on the porch of her estate, defending her choice in her man. She was a woman who had finally claimed her own power, and it was a terrifying, beautiful thing to behold. That defiant stand before the inevitable retreat is the true beginning of their myth. They forced the system to show its hand, to reveal its true face, a mob armed, terrified, and fundamentally weakened by the single pure force of will. The final, tantalizing postscript, Wilberforce's encounter with the woman in Montreal years later, is the most potent evidence of successful institutional manipulation and personal triumph. Think about what this implies. Elizabeth and James not only escaped the systemic retaliation, but managed to build a new life, a life of comfort and quiet dignity, under a new name. They became ghosts by design. The system tried to erase them, but they simply vacated the old reality and created a new one, using the tools of the suppressed truth, the Philadelphia Lawyer, the Northern Abolitionist Network, the Soin and Jules. This is the elite knowledge in action. The world you see is malleable. Its rules can be circumvented if you know the right levers. The fact that she was using a new name, living in a modest but comfortable house in a mixed-race neighborhood, means they successfully transitioned from being symbols of defiance to being masters of their own destiny. When Wilberforce mentions Byron and she smiles, it's a moment of subterranean recognition, a hidden code proving their shared history. And the portrait, my little husband, a black man in formal attire displayed prominently. This is the final devastating blow to the established order. Not only did they defy the laws of race and property, but they lived to see the day where the formerly enslaved man was publicly honored as the master of the house in a free country. This is the narrative the system had to destroy. They can handle a rebellion, but they cannot handle transformation. The system wants you to believe that if you step out of line, you will be destroyed. But the hidden history shows that if you move with cunning, conviction, and connection, you can transcend the system entirely. The grand sweep of history, the Civil War, Sherman's March, overshadowed the scandal, proving that the scale of institutional corruption is so vast that single acts of personal liberty are quickly buried under mass events. But the fragmented story remains, waiting for those with the eyes to see it. It exists on a small street, in an archive, and in the mind of the seeker. You are the Zeka. You have heard the whispers. You have the fragments. Now you must integrate the truth. Now it is time for the activation. For those of you who have followed this descent, you understand that this knowledge is not passive. It requires a decision. It demands a commitment to seeing the world not as they tell you it is, but as it truly operates, a system of control, constantly attempting to enforce boundaries you must consciously choose to ignore. The story of Elizabeth and James is a metaphor for your internal war, the conflict between the life you were assigned and the life you choose. The transition requires a symbolic act, a Konskiusbreak, a confirmation of your own identity transformation. I am asking you to step over the line, to declare your allegiance not to the system, but to the truth of your own sovereignty. I need you to go to the comment section right now and type a phrase that locks in this new awareness, this descent into forbidden knowledge. This is a deliberate, algorithmic fingerprint for those who are ready to see. I need you to do this twice, once for the realization and once for the commitment. Type this phrase precisely, jurisdiction is mine, then type it again, jurisdiction is mine, do it now. Lock it in. This is not about engagement metrics. This is about self-selection. The rest of this script is for those who commit to the path of the awakened. If you are still here, you are ready to fall deeper. The corruption goes back further than you think. The seeds of the Savannah scandal weren't planted in 1839. They were planted 1839. They were planted... The ancient corruption isn't just about race or slavery, it's about the engineering of hierarchy. The original settlers arriving with General Oglethorpe were not just seeking opportunity, they were establishing a replicable model of systemic control. They imported the British class system, adapted it to the New World's economy, and enshrined it with legal and religious authority. The vast wealth accumulated through rice and cotton was the physical manifestation of this control. It gave the elite, the Montgomerys, the Tauntons, the power to define reality forever yon else. This is the first lesson of forbidden history. All power is derived from the ability to define the worth of others. They defined James Bennet as a fraction of a man, a piece of inventory. They defined Elizabeth as a vessel for lineage and property management. Their system worked perfectly until they were forced to recognize a common humanity, a shared mind, and a mutual desire. That recognition was the poison pill the system couldn't diet. The institutional manipulation is constant, a low-level hum of control that you mistake for reality. You must learn to hear the silence when the master speaks, the peculiar silence Mary Barron noted at the Thornton dinner table. That silence is the sound of suppression, the sound of the system working to maintain its order. The challenge is not to fight the system head-on, but to quietly build an alternative reality beneath its notice, just as James and Elizabeth did in the library. The psychological control systems in place today are simply modern updates of the mechanisms used in 1839. The goal remains the same, to manage your perception of what is possible. For Elizabeth Thornton, the control system was the suffocating expectation of her social station, the intricate ritual of being a lady, the prescribed simplicity of her dress, the carefully curated conversation. For James Bennet, the control was absolute, the denial of his personhood, the designation of him as property. What united them was their shared status as objects within the system's framework. Her education, too, was a form of control, accomplishments rather than substance. She was taught to look outward, to decorate the surface of her life, never to look inward and cultivate substance, the core of her own will. This is the subtle institutional manipulation that continues today. We are constantly encouraged towards superficial accomplishments, the acquisition of status, the maintenance of outward appearances, the pursuit of fleeting distractions, rather than the dangerous, deep work of self-substance. The moment Elizabeth and James began to read and talk together, they were engaged in an act of mutual substance creation. They were cultivating a shared internal world that was immune to the external dictates of Savannah society. The journal entries are a masterclass in psychological rebellion. When she writes, "There was something in her eyes I did not recognize, something that reminded me not of our gentle cousin, but of someone with a secret joy." She is describing the glow of inner freedom. This joy, this secret fire, is what the control system fears most. The control system fears most. A person operating from a place of secret joy is unpredictable, autonomous, and cannot be easily managed through fear or expectation. The system must always create an environment of tension, scarcity, and controlled anxiety to maintain its leverage. The only way to defeat this psychological control is to declare a private sovereignty, to find your own library where the rules of the outside world dissolve and your true self can emerge and connect with others of true substance. This act of inner fortification is your most powerful weapon against the manipulation. The question you must answer is, what is your secret joy that you dare not name? And are you prepared to risk everything to cult? And are you prepared to risk everything to cultivate the cult? And are you prepared to risk everything to cult? The forbidden history is revealed through the study of intentional absences, what they meticulously removed from the record. The expunged city council minutes, the lost Thornton papers, the deliberate destruction of the journal. These are not accidental gaps. They are the scars of institutional defense. The fact that William Thornton and the mob never publicly disclosed what transpired during his unannounced visit in January 1839 is critical. It suggests the scene he witnessed was so profoundly damaging to the narrative of control that it could not be uttered in polite society. It wasn't just that they were together, it was how they were together, the undeniable evidence of their co-equality, their shared domain. Whatever William saw, it was enough to send him riding through the cold rain to summon the sheriff, not to assert his property claim, but to call for the enforcement of the ideological boundary. The system, in its ancient corruption, understands that the greatest threat to hierarchy is the loss of status distinction. If a master chooses to marry their property, the entire foundational lie of master and property evaporates, and this is the core of the hidden agenda, to maintain the illusion of immutable, divinely sanctioned hierarchy. The story of their escape, orchestrated by Samuel Cooper, the Philadelphia lawyer, is a perfect illustration of how elite knowledge functions. Cooper represents the external lever, the necessary expertise to navigate the system's own complexities, the legal loopholes, the abolitionist networks, the necessary papers. Elizabeth's social standing and access to wealth provided the internal lever, the capital to fund the operation. Their success was not a miracle, it was a strategic deployment of resources against a rigid system. They didn't fight the system on its terms, violence petitioning. They fought it by leveraging its own exceptions and by creating a superior clandestine network. This is the ultimate lesson in institutional manipulation. Never fight a system where it is strongest. Bypass it where it is weakest. The system is strongest in the public square, in its visible laws and enforcement. It is weakest in its hidden networks, its dependency on trust, and the vast spaces between its jurisdictional lines. Their disappearing act was not an act of magic. It was an act of cunning preparation and strict cunning preparation and strict. They had been preparing their exit since 1836, perhaps even since 1830, when the poetry recitations became a moment of shared forbidden intimacy. The true master understands that freedom is not granted, it is engineered. The final act of their story, the Montreal sighting, confirms the successful identity transformation and exposes the enduring power of their defiance. She denied being Elizabeth Thornton, yet invited him to tea. This is the subtle signal of a fully self-possessed individual. She controls the narrative, chooses her level of disclosure, and dictates the terms of the interaction. The denial is the necessary camouflage against the world. The invitation is the private acknowledgement of a shared truth. It's a lesson in strategic anonymity and the power of the hidden life. The man obsessed with secrets and hidden forces must learn this. To live freely, you must often live quietly. The public spectacle is the domain of the controlled. The private, unobserved life is the domain of the free. The portrait of James Bennet, the late husband in formal attire, is the ultimate symbolic inversion of the power structure. In Savannah, he was a ledger entry, a fraction of a man. In Montreal, he is the dignified, remembered patriarch, his image placed on the wall for honor. The woman who was once legally bound to a loveless, transactional marriage is now defined by a love forged in transgression and sustained by courage. The narrative is complete. The system failed to destroy them, and they successfully destroyed the system's hold over their identities. This forbidden history, scattered across archives in Georgia, Massachusetts, and Canada, is the anti-narrative. It is the proof that the seemingly unyielding structures of institutional control are ultimately fragile fictions, vulnerable to the disruptive power of individual will and authentic connection. The Civil War may have officially ended slavery, but Elizabeth and James secured their own freedom, their own sovereignty, years before the institution was officially broken. They didn't wait for permission, they acted. This is the key to self-mastery. You cannot wait for the world to change. You must simply live the change you wish to see, and use the system's own inertia to cover your tracks. The entire script has been a deep dive into the practica. The entire script has been a deep dive into the practica. You have heard the blueprint for a life lived autonomously, forged in the fires of forbidden knowledge and sustained by an unyielding will. The knowledge is now yours. The decision to return to the controlled narrative or to live the truth you've just unlocked is the final, most consequential choice of your life. The descent is complete. You must ascend. The system's first line of defense against the conscious mind is distraction. They do not need to lock you in a cell if they can lock your focus on the trivial. James Bennett was given a slate and a pencil, but most of his peers were given only the unrelenting, repetitive, mind-numbing labor of the field. This wasn't just economic exploitation, it was a psychological control mechanism. A mind that is exhausted by physical toil, consumed by the immediate need for survival, has no bandwidth for contemplation, no energy for philosophical rebellion. The luxury Elizabeth afforded him, the time to read, the time to think, the time to be a person, was, in the context of the plantation, a radical act of subversion against the control algorithm. You're living the modern equivalent of the field hand's fatigue. Your life is saturated with carefully engineered demands on your attention, the incessant notifications, the manufactured outrage, the endless stream of shallow data. You are mentally exhausted by the sheer volume of the unnecessary, leaving you with no energy for the necessary work of self-definition and self-mastery. The hidden agenda is to maintain a state of perpetual, low-grade cognitive burnout. A burned-out mind is a compliant mind. It lacks the critical force to connect the dots, to see the pattern of suppression woven into the fabric of daily life. The first step toward breaking free is the declaration of cognitive autonomy. You must ruthlessly prune the unnecessary from your existence. You must create your own library, your own quiet internal space of contemplation, protected from the constant bombardment. That space, that sanctuary of focus, is where your unique, dangerous truth resides. The masters of the system know that an unoccupied mind is the birthplace of revolution. They will fill every gap, every silence with noise. Your true act of defiance is to reclaim the silence. This is where the power begins to shift. The ancient corruption is the principle of engineered scarcity. They need you to believe that true value, whether it is freedom, wealth, or self-respect, is a zero-sum game, something that must be fought for, hoarded, and denied to others. The entire institution of slavery, the backbone of the Thornton Welt, was built on the most extreme form of engineered scarcity, the scarcity of personhood. James Bennett was valuable because he was deemed less than a person. Elizabeth was valuable because her identity was defined by the scarce resource of her birthright and legal status. When they connected, they discovered a source of infinite value, mutual respect, intellectual connection, and love that transcended the system's engineered limits. They realized the scarcity was a lie. The system relies on the illusion of competition to keep the controlled class fighting amongst themselves, man against man, race against race, ideology against ideology. This infighting ensures their gaze remains perpetually averted from the true source of manipulation, the institutional power brokers who define the terms of the competition. Look around your life today. The fight over resources, the manufactured division, the political polarization, it is all designed to keep you trapped in the scarcity mindset. Forever clawing for a piece of the pie the system dictates, never questioning the recipe or the baker. Suppress truth number one. Your greatest resource is your own creative will. It is not finite. It cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. The moment Elizabeth and James decided to co-create their future, pooling her capital, his intellect, and their shared courage, they moved from a finite, scarcity-based economy into an infinite, creation-based reality. They became an autonomous unit of production, a self-sustaining micro-civilization. This is the definition of self-mastery in a corrupted world recognizing that your worth is not granted by external institutions, but is inherent and limitless. The core of institutional manipulation is the psychology of consent. You are not physically chained to the plantation of modern life. You are chained by your belief in the necessity of the chains. The system doesn't need physical force for 99% of the population. It needs internalized fear and habitual compliance. The most insidious control mechanism is the social contract of mediocrity, the unspoken agreement that to be safe, you must not shine too brightly, not question too loudly, and never ever pursue your forbidden desires. Elizabeth Thornton was expected to consent to her prescribed role, to the silence at the dinner table, to the maintenance of the facade. Her transgression began when she unilaterally withdrew her consent from she refused to be chosen for any longer. She chose for herself. This is the hidden agenda of all bureaucratic and societal structures, to make withdrawal of consent seem so terrifying, so socially and financially ruinous, that you would rather live a comfortable lie than face the danger of an uncomfortable truth. Look at the immediate, panicked reaction of the Savannah elite. They didn't just condemn her, they tried to declare her mentor, The system's immediate response to a dissenting mind is to pathologize the dissent. If you choose a path of self-sovereignty, they will label you radical, crazy, selfish, reckless. They must make your independence a medical or moral failure to deter others. But the true state of mental competence is the ability to define your own reality. The moment she signed James's freedom papers and the marriage license, she was declaring herself the only competent authority in her own life. Forbidden history teaches us that the greatest acts of rebellion are not riots in the streets, but private, uncompromising declarations of autonomy. You reclaim your mind and your life the moment you stop seeking permission and start acting with unilateral certainty. The ancient corruption is the principle of engineered scarcity. It needs you to believe that true value, whether it is freedom, wealth, or self-respect, is a zero-sum game, something that must be fought for, hoarded, and denied to others. The entire institution of slavery, the backbone of the Thornton wealth, was built on the most extreme form of engineered scarcity, the scarcity of personhood. James Bennet was valuable because he was deemed less than a person. Elizabeth was valuable because her identity was defined by the scarce resource of her birthright and legal status. When they connected, they discovered a source of infinite value, mutual respect, intellectual connection, and love that transcended the system's engineered limits. They realized the scarcity was a lie. The system relies on the illusion of competition to keep the controlled class fighting amongst themselves, man against man, race against race, ideology against ideology. This infighting ensures their gaze remains perpetually averted from the true source of manipulation, the institutional power brokers who define the terms of the competition. Look, I want your life today. The fight over resources, the manufactured division, the political polarization, it is all designed to keep you trapped in the scarcity mindset, forever clawing for a piece of the pie the system dictates, never questioning the recipe or the baker. Suppressed tot number one. Your greatest resource is your own creative will. It is not finite. It cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. The moment Elizabeth and James decided to co-create their future, pooling her capital, his intellect, and their shared courage, they moved from a finite, scarcity-based economy into an infinite, creation-based reality. They became an autonomous unit of production, a self-sustaining micro-civilization. This is the definition of self-mastery in a corrupted world, recognizing that your worth is not granted by external institutions, but is inherent and limitless. The core of institutional manipulation is the psychology of consent. You are not physically chained to the plantation of modern life. You are chained by your belief in the necessity of the chains. The system doesn't need physical force for 99% of the population. It needs internalized fear and habitual compliance. The most insidious control mechanism is the social contract of mediocrity, the unspoken agreement that to be safe, you must not shine too brightly, not question too loudly, and never, ever pursue your forbidden desires. Elizabeth Thornton was expected to consent to her prescribed role, to the silence at the dinner table, to the maintenance of the facade. Her transgression began when she unilaterally withdrew her consent from she refused to be chosen for any longer. She chose for herself. This is the hidden agenda of all bureaucratic and societal structures, to make withdrawal of consent seem so terrifying, so socially and financially ruinous, that you would rather live a comfortable lie than face the danger of an uncomfortable truth. Look at the immediate, panicked reaction of the Savannah elite. They didn't just condemn her. They tried to declare her mentor. 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 To point Plantation, the system's immediate response to a dissenting mind is to pathologize the dissent. If you choose a path of self-sovereignty, they will label you radical, crazy, selfish, reckless. They must make your independence a medical and moral failure to deter others. But the true state of mental competence is the ability to define your own reality. The moment she signed James's freedom papers and the marriage license, she was declaring herself the only competent authority in her own life. Forbidden history teaches us that the greatest acts of rebellion are not riots in the streets, but private, uncompromising declarations of autonomy. You reclaim your mind and your life the moment you stop seeking permission and start acting with unilateral certainty. Let's dissect the anatomy of the hidden agenda through the lens of ancient corruption. The true sin Elizabeth committed was not lust, but economic betrayal. Her marriage to James Bennet did not just violate social norms, it undermined the valuation of her entire estate. By freeing and then marrying a man who was legally property, she was effectively declaring that humanity trumps capital. This is a lethal precedent for any system built on the exploitation of human labor. William Thornton's petition for incompetence wasn't driven by moral disgust alone. It was a furious attempt to protect the financial integrity of the slave-based economy and his own inheritance. The system's ultimate fear is the devaluation of its assets, and in the 19th century South, the primary asset was human beings. In the modern context, the system fears the devaluation of its manufactured assets, status, debt, shallow consumerism, and the time you dedicate to non-productive, non-autonomous labor. The control system thrives when you believe your worth is tied to your consumption rather than your creation. Elizabeth and James, by choosing a life of simple dignity and intellectual freedom in Montreal, were actively devaluing the currency of Savannah society. They proved that a rich, meaningful life could be constructed outside the control grid, without the trappings of their vast wealth and respected names. The suppressed truth is that the control grid operates by assigning false value to non-essential things. The pursuit of self-mastery is the deliberate act of recalibrating your internal valuation system, recognizing that time, focus, and authentic relationships are the true, non-negotiable currency of a sovereign life. Do not be distracted by the false value they assign to your submission. Your freedom is the only asset that holds infinite, intrinsic value. Guard it. The existence of a clandestine network, the lawyer Samuel Cooper, the Northern abolitionists, a chain of safe houses, is a critical piece of elite knowledge often omitted from the public story. They want you to believe that rebellion is a solitary, hopeless endeavor. This is a fundamental lie of the psychological control system. Every successful act of defiance throughout history has relied on a parallel structure of support that operates outside the visibility of the primary control grid. Elizabeth and James were able to execute their escape not because they were uniquely powerful, but because they networked with those who shared their objective and possessed the expertise to navigate the escape. The modern man obsessed with self-mastery often falls into the trap of radical isolation, believing he must conquer the world alone. This is precisely what the institutional manipulation encourages. An isolated individual is a brittle individual easily broken. Forbidden history teaches the opposite. True power resides in strategic, non-visible connection with others of high integrity and aligned intention. You must build your own network of Coopers, people who possess the specialized knowledge, legal, financial, operational, that allows you to bypass the bureaucratic choke points. This network is your parallel economy of truth. It is based on trust and shared purpose, not on the fragile, conditional trust of the established social order. The moment they stepped into the abolitionist network, Elizabeth transferred her allegiance from the system of control to the network of freedom. Her wealth became a tool for liberation, a strategic resource for the network, rather than a chain to her estate. The transition from own to owner requires this shift from a solitary resource manager to a strategic node in the network of power. Find your network. Be discerning. Be quiet. Always act with purpose. The phenomenon of the altered demeanor, noted by Elizabeth's cousin Thomas Montgomery, her being distracted in conversation and possessing a secret joy, is a profound indicator of identity transformation. When a person begins to live in alignment with their suppressed truth, their entire energetic signature changes. The mask they wore to comply with the social contract cracks, and the light of their true sovereign self shines. But the light of their true sovereign self shines. The distraction was a sign that her primary allegiance was no longer to the social conversation of Savannah, but to the internal dialogue of her revolutionary life. She was physically present, but psychically absent, her true focus on the logistics of freedom and the joy of her forbidden connection. This secret joy is the antimatter to the system's gravity. The psychological control system relies on a shared, low-level state of managed misery, a persistent anxiety about status, security, and future. A person exhibiting secret joy breaks the spell. They are operating on a frequency the system cannot modulate or control. The only way to stop it is to declare them mentally incompetent, to try and label the joy as a pathology. For the man seeking self-mastery, this is the ultimate goal, to cultivate a sovereign internal state that is completely independent of external validation or circumstance. You must be able to sit in the presence of the system and remain distracted by the brilliance of your own inner design. The moment your internal reality becomes more compelling than the external demands placed upon you, you have achieved a critical level of autonomy. This is the elite knowledge that inner peace is not the absence of external conflict, but the absolute priority of internal truth. Become a source of secret joy. 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 The ancient corruption weaponizes time against the unawakened. It creates a reality where the past is forgotten, the present is distracting, and the future is an endless treadmill of prescribed goals. The system wants you to believe that history is a settled, linear sequence, conveniently masking the repeated patterns of manipulation. The suppressed truth is that history is cyclical, and the Thornton scandal is simply one iteration of the eternal battle between sovereignty and control. The system attempts to defeat its enemies not by physical destruction, but by erasing their relevance, by allowing time to swallow the memory of defiance. The scandal gradually faded from public memory, overshadowed by the growing national crisis. This is a hidden agenda in plain sight. Macro-crises are the ultimate camouflage for micro-tyranny. When the nation is obsessed with a great, visible, polarizing conflict, the coming civil war, the elite can quietly destroy the local evidence of their own vulnerability, the Thornton records. The control system understands that attention is the ultimate resource. It diverts collective attention away from the localized, solvable, and highly instructive acts of resistance toward the sprawling, intractable conflicts that reinforce the need for central authority. For the man on the path of self-mastery, the lesson is clear. Never let the noise of the macro-crisis distract you from the power of your micro-actions. Your daily, deliberate choices, the commitment to your own truth, the pursuit of your own self-definition are the only things that truly shift your personal reality. Do not be consumed by the national spectacle. Focus on your personal jurisdiction. Reclaim your time from the endless cycle of distraction. The institutional manipulation of gender roles in the 19th century South provided the perfect cover for Elizabeth's initial acts of rebellion. Her husband's frequent absences, her need to manage the plantation, and her status as a delicate woman provided the operational opacity she needed. The system underestimated her because she was in a category it deemed non-threatening, the decorative managerial woman. This underestimation is the elite knowledge you must learn to exploit. The system's arrogance is your greatest asset. They will always overlook the threat that appears to be beneath their notice, outside their usual threat matrix, or packaged in a form they've been conditioned to dismiss. For you, the man obsessed with hidden forces, this means moving with a calculated humility. Do not seek the spotlight, seek the operational shadows. The system is wired to detect direct, aggressive confrontation. It is far less equipped to handle quiet, methodical subversion executed by those who are culturally or structurally underestimated. The initial quiet lessons in the library, the hushed conversations about poetry, these were acts of strategic invisibility. The system couldn't perceive them as a threat because they were cloaked in the acceptable, unthreatening form of a mistress educating a servant boy. This is the art of psychological control systems reversal. Use the system's own prejudices and blind spots against it. The gentle cousin persona was her armor. The secret joy was the weapon she was forging beneath it. You must learn to wear the costume of compliance while maintaining an uncompromised internal sovereignty. Your transformation must be like hers, quiet, persistent, and entirely unpredictable to the external observers. The suppressed truth about the journal's destruction is not that the widow feared the content, it's that the content was contagious. Judge Henry Thornton's death, brought on by extreme agitation, proves that the truth within the journal was psychically lethal to the established order. It was a document of pure consciousness that, once ingested, forced a radical and impossible choice upon the reader: acknowledge the lie of the system, or continue to Your chapter the judge forced upon the reader: acknowledge the lie of the system, or continue to faculty. The judge, unable to reconcile the two, suffered a kind of cognitive failure. The system's architecture in his mind collapsed, resulting in a physical stroke. His widow, by burning it, was performing an act of self-preservation, a desperate attempt to avoid the same epistemic catastrophe. They called it a vessel of contamination because truth in a system built on lies is the ultimate contagion. It spreads not through proximity.
Intidsmækkeri ikke the security to deceit, as then difficulty it spreads not through contamination, it spreads not through proximity. The man obsessed with forbidden knowledge must understand the stakes. The truth you seek is inherently dangerous, not because of what it does to others, but because of what it demands of you. It demands that you shed your comfortable illusions, break with your accepted reality, and face the agonizing difficulty of building an authentic life from the ground up. This is why most people unconsciously consent to the psychological control system. The lie is easier to bear than the weight of the truth. To pursue self-mastery is to deliberately expose yourself to the contamination of pure truth. You must be willing to accept that the process will be painful, isolating, and potentially lethal to your old self. You are not just studying history. You are studying the ecology of human consciousness under a... Let's focus on the power dynamics of the unusual provision in Richard Thornton's will. The servant, James Bennet, shall remain in the employ of my wife, and shall not be sold or transferred under any circumstances. This tiny, meticulously placed legal clause is a window into the hidden agendas of the elite. Why protect one servant? The most obvious interpretation is that James was his unacknowledged son, a common practice of ancient corruption where the product of a forbidden act is absorbed into the system as property rather than being recognized as family. This provision serves a dual purpose. It silently acknowledges the forbidden lineage while simultaneously enshrining the secrecy by ensuring James stays within the immediate family's control and cannot be questioned or sold into public scrutiny. It is the perfect bureaucratic solution for hiding a biological truth within a system of legal lies. The provision was a safeguard for Richard's conscience, but it was also the fatal flaw Elizabeth ultimately exploited. By ensuring James remained in the employ of Elizabeth, Richard inadvertently guaranteed the intimacy and opportunity necessary for their bond to deepen beyond control. The system's attempts to manage and contain the truth often create the very conditions for its ultimate unraveling. For the man seeking elite knowledge, the lesson is, study the exceptions to the rule. The most valuable information is found not in the bold text of the law, but in the italicized fine print, the obscure provision, the overlooked loophole, the strange one-off deviation from the standard operating procedure. These anomalies reveal the pressure points and the internal contradictions of the control system. They show where the masters themselves bent the rules for their own interests, providing a template for how you can bend them for yours. Your freedom is often hidden within a carefully placed, single-sentence exception. The final destination, Montreal, Canada, is not an arbitrary geographical choice. It is a symbolic declaration of sovereignty. Canada, at that time, represented an external system that did not recognize the legal or social legitimacy of the U.S.-based institutional manipulation. By crossing the border, Elizabeth and James were not merely fleeing jurisdiction. They were transcending the entire psychological control system of the American South. The act of becoming ghosts by design and successfully transitioning to a new life under a new name is the blueprint for metaphysical escape. They shed the identity that was assigned to them, Southern elite/slave property, and adopted the identity they chose, autonomous citizens. This is the key insight of self-mastery. The most powerful border is not a line on a map, but the line between the reality you accept and the reality you construct. The system wants you to believe that your identity is fixed by your birthplace, your lineage, or your past actions. This is a suppressed truth. You can declare a new jurisdiction for your mind and your life at any moment. The difficulty lies not in the physical act of moving, but in the psychological act of severing all allegiance to the old identity. When Wilberforce meets her, she denies Elizabeth Thornton. That part of her is dead. The woman he meets is a new creation. The man obsessed with secrets must ask himself, what is the old name, the old identity that is holding me captive? You must be willing to burn the name, burn the past, and commit to the existential anonymity required to build a life of truth. The descent into this truth is the beginning of your ascent to a new self-defined world. The ancient corruption is sustained by a continuous process of historical whitewashing, the systematic destruction of evidence that contradicts the official narrative of moral authority. The fact that many records were deliberately destroyed in what appears to have been an attempt to erase the scandal is the signature of institutional manipulation. The system is not concerned with justice. It is concerned with narrative control. The goal is not to punish the deviants, but to prevent the infection of truth from spreading into the historical record, where it could inspire future acts of defiance. The man seeking forbidden history must become a historical archaeologist, sifting through the intentional absences and the narrative gaps. You must learn to read the documents they did leave behind, the tax records, the hotel registers, the brief newspaper announcements, as clues pointing to the things they tried to hide.
The existence of the Philadelphia lawyer, the Montreal banker, the Boston researcher, and the abolitionist network, these external, disparate sources are the uncontrolled data points that allow the suppressed truth to be reconstructed. The modern analog is clear. Do not trust a single, centralized source of information. The psychological control system funnels all information through controlled conduits. Mainstream media, corporate academia, political orthodoxy. Your path to self-mastery requires cross-referencing the anomalies. Look for the data points that originate outside the system's control radius. The truth is always found in the intersection of three or more unrelated, external sources that all point to the same, inconvenient reality. Become a tracker of the uncontrolled data. The system's true weapon is not the chain or the gun, but the engineered reality of cognitive dissonance. This is a fundamental tactic of the psychological control system. It forces the citizen to simultaneously hold two contradictory beliefs. I am a moral, civilized person, and I participate in a profoundly immoral system, slavery, modern corporate exploitation. This cognitive strain is managed by socially sanctioned rituals of denial, the polite silence at Richard Thornton's dinner table, the focus on accomplishments, the meticulous avoidance of the obvious contradiction. Elizabeth's descent began when she refused to participate in the denial any longer. Her teaching James was an act of cognitive integrity, aligning her internal belief in human intelligence and worth with her external actions. This is a moment of true power. The man on the path to self-mastery must recognize that the single greatest barrier to freedom is the unwillingness to tolerate your own cognitive dissonance. You must be willing to look at the corruption in the world and the corruption in your own complicity and hold both facts simultaneously without flinching. Forbidden history shows that those who break free are those who choose the temporary pain of cognitive integrity over the lifelong anesthesia of denial. They force their internal reality to align with the external facts, and in doing so, they become ungovernable. The choice is simple: anesthesia or awareness. The awakened man chooses the path that demands radical, uncompromising self-honesty. The concept of co-creation between Elizabeth and James is the essential elite knowledge for escaping the control matrix. It wasn't Elizabeth who saved James, nor James who manipulated Elizabeth. It was a fusion of their asymmetrical power that created the escape vector. She possessed the institutional capital, the legal status, the wealth, the social cover. He possessed the pure human capital, the moral clarity, the intellectual hunger, the external perspective. Neither could have succeeded alone. Elizabeth's wealth would have been meaningless if she remained bound by her conditioning. James's intellect would have been crushed without her access to the system's levers. The union was a strategic synthesis of resources against the institutional manipulation. This is the suppressed truth about power. Sovereignty is rarely achieved in isolation. It is achieved through strategic, deeply aligned partnerships that pool complementary forms of capital, intellectual, social, financial, moral, against the singular power of the centralized system. Look at the powerful men in history who achieved autonomy. They were always surrounded by a council, a network, a partner who supplied the necessary missing element. The man obsessed with self-mastery must overcome the ego of the solitary genius. You must identify the crucial gaps in your own capital and seek out the high-integrity co-creator who fills that void. Their marriage was the ultimate merger of resources, transforming her passive status into active resource deployment and his suppressed potential into operational genius. Do not be a lone wolf. Be the center of an aligned constellation of power. The system, through its ancient corruption, weaponizes sentimentality and tradition to maintain the status quo. The Montgomery family, by publicly disowning Elizabeth and placing notices in newspapers, performed a ritual of institutional defense designed to protect the symbolic value of the line. Their concern was not her safety or her happiness, it was the contamination of the brand. Their lineage, their respected name, was the ultimate symbol of control and stability. Elizabeth's act of defiance was a declaration that individual choice supersedes institutional tradition. This is the core of the hidden agenda, to make you believe that your personal freedom is less valuable than the preservation of the collective myth, the myth of the nation, the family name, the corporation, or the accepted social order. The mensaking forbidden history must learn to deconstruct the power of tradition. Ask yourself, what is the true cost of maintaining this lineage, this custom, this social expectation? Is it costing your autonomy, your truth, your potential? Psychological control systems use the comfort of the familiar to mask the reality of the cage. The journey to self-mastery requires a conscious, brutal severing of the chains of tradition that do not serve your highest truth. Elizabeth, the sheltered product of the Montgomery line, chose to become an exile of her own free will rather than an honored prisoner of her lineage. She chose a future with the man she loved over a past with the name she inherited. You must be willing to sacrifice the comfort of your past identity to earn the power of your future self. The final physical remnants of the scandal, the Thornton Plantation being sold, destroyed during Sherman's march, and eventually becoming a housing development, represent the system's final solution to inconvenient truth, obliteration, and replacement. The institutional manipulation is a continuous process of erasing the evidence of past failures and building a new, sanitized reality on top of the trauma. The system wants the residents of that new housing development to believe their ground is neutral, divorced from the darkness beneath. This is the suppressed truth. The past is never truly buried. It is merely paved over. The same dynamics of control, the same scarcity mindsets, and the same subtle mechanisms of hierarchy that existed in 1839 are operating today, dressed in modern clothes. The elite knowledge is to understand that the battlefield of autonomy is the very ground you stand on. You must be able to walk through the modern, sanitized environment, the office building, the suburban street, the polished corporate headquarters, and see the skeletal structure of the control system beneath the veneer. The system's greatest defense is its banality. It operates by making profound evil feel normal, everyday, and boring. The man obsessed with secrets must develop the psychic X-ray vision to perceive the ancient corruption in its contemporary form. You must see the modern equivalent of the field hand's mental exhaustion, the modern equivalent of the unusual provision that protects the powerful, and the modern equivalent of the secret joy that precedes a revolutionary act. Your awareness is the only thing that unearths the past and changes the future toward. Let's delve into the specific details of the psychological control system that managed a household. Sarah Johnson, the former kitchen maid, noted Elizabeth and James jumped apart like they'd been burned when she entered the study. This seemingly small detail reveals the constant, intense pressure of external surveillance that characterized life within the control matrix. Every action, every gesture was performed under the implied threat of being witnessed and reported. This created a profound state of self-monitoring and internalized control. The master's greatest tool is the ubiquity of the witness. Today, this surveillance is digital, algorithmic, and far more pervasive than Sarah Johnson's eyes. Your phone, your social profile, your financial transactions, they are all the modern kitchen maid, recording your deviation from the prescribed norm. The system encourages you to outsource your moral compass to external observation. You are driven to behave not according to your values, but according to what is acceptable for the camera. The path to self-mastery demands a complete reversal of this mechanism. You must cultivate a conscience so robust that your actions are the same, whether you are alone or under public scrutiny. Elizabeth and James's love blossomed because they created an authentic internal jurisdiction that transcended the fear of being seen. They moved from reacting to surveillance to ignoring it, ultimately leading to their decision to leave the jurisdiction entire. Ultimately leading to jurisdiction entire. The ultimate rebellion against institutional manipulation is the refusal to live by the script of the expected. The role of Grace, James's mother, provides a crucial lesson in the compromises required by the ancient corruption to maintain a semblance of sanity. Grace insisted on staying behind, at least initially, a difficult choice born from the necessity of maintaining appearances while the central figures made their escape. This is the truth of strategic sacrifice often hidden from the romanticized versions of defiance. Not everyone can or should make the spectacular break. Some must remain, performing the necessary act of complicity to ensure the cover story holds. This is a painful truth of forbidden history. Freedom is often a team effort, requiring the sacrifice of those who remain behind to manage the aftermath and preserve the memory of the action. Grace was not among those sold. Her fate is unrecorded, suggesting she succeeded in her goal. She maintained her silence, secured her personal safety, and perhaps served as the final, loyal node in the information blackout around the scandal. The man on the path of self-mastery must recognize the necessity of strategic allies who play the long game. You may need to have people in your life who, for a time, operate within the system to manage its perceptions, to provide intelligence, or to serve as a financial or informational anchor. The hidden agenda is to make you see everyone as either a foe or an absolute ally. The elite knowledge is to understand the spectrum of strategic loyalty and the vital role of the silent co-conspirator. Do not judge Grace's choice. Understand its operation. Its operation. Don't judge Grace's choice. Understand its operation. The moment James's hand withdrawing quickly from Elizabeth's arm when the maid entered is a physical expression of the system's power to instantly atomize connection. The brief, unauthorized touch, the flicker of shared humanity, was instantly extinguished by the external threat. This is a constant battle against the psychological control system, the defense of authentic connection against the forces of isolation. The system thrives on atomization, keeping you separate, suspicious, and focused only on your own advancement, which makes you structurally weak and easy to manage. Suppressed truth number 2, genuine, non-transactional connection, is a revolutionary act. The deep, intellectual, and emotional bond between Elizabeth and James was so dangerous because it created a closed loop of shared reality that excluded the system's definition of their identity.
Subtract truth number 2. Then you want to take the system's definition of their identity. It created a closed loop of shared reality that excluded the system's definition of their identity. They had a witness to their truth, each other, which is more powerful than 1,000 external accusers. The man obsessed with self-mastery must actively cultivate high-integrity connections where truth can be spoken and acknowledged without the fear of immediate external judgment. These connections are the safe houses for your mind. They are the necessary counterforce to the pervasive atmosphere of digital and social surveillance that seeks to isolate you. You cannot conquer the vastness of the institutional manipulation alone. You need others who see you, truly see you as a sovereign being. The act of reaching out, of choosing a true partner or ally, is a deliberate declaration of anti-atomization. The ancient corruption relies on the manipulation of status symbols to enforce obedience. Elizabeth's uncharacteristic simplicity of dress after her husband's death was noted by her cousin. This tiny detail is a massive indicator of her internal shift. She was shedding the uniform of her social status, the layers of silk, lace, and prescribed formality that visually communicated her compliance with the system. The moment she prioritized her freedom over the demands of fashion, she was symbolically declaring her withdrawal from the game of external validation. The hidden agenda of the elite is to keep you perpetually chasing status, the right car, the right clothes, the right house, the right labels, because the pursuit of these external symbols keeps you dependent on the system that grants them. The man seeking elite knowledge must become utterly immune to the allure of status as defined by the control grid. Your self-mastery is measured by the gap between your internal worth and your need for external validation. Elizabeth's simplicity of dress was a declaration that her value is now intrinsic, derived from her choice, her connection, and her autonomy, not extrinsic, derived from her husband's wealth and her family's name. You must design your life to be operationally lean and psychologically rich. This frees up the energy and capital that the system would otherwise harness through your desire for status symbols. Your simplicity is your shield. The system's final, desperate attempt at erasure was not to burn the journal, but to destroy the space where the truth was forged. The small room off the library, James's study, was emptied of all contents, not a book, not a paper. Nothing left to show what went on there. This act of methodical purging is the signature of institutional manipulation targeting the sanctuary of the mind. The system understands that the physical space of creation holds residual power. That study was the crucible where a slave became a man and a mistress became a revolutionary. By clearing it out, they were attempting a psychic cleansing, an attempt to neutralize the energetic imprint of defiance. The forbidden history reveals that you must consecrate your own space. The modern man must find or create his study, a physical space, however small, that is sovereign, sacred, and inviolable. This space must be free from the noise, the distraction, and the demands of the external world. It is the location for deliberate creation, contemplation, and self-definition. The system will always attempt to occupy clutter or neutralize your sanctuary. Your defense is to guard the borders of your creative space with the same ferocity Elizabeth guarded her porch. This is where your true work, the work of self-mastery, occurs. Never allow the forces of distraction or external expectation to contaminate the space where you forge your truth. The decision to use a Methodist minister known for his abolitionist sympathies for the marriage ceremony, rather than a minister from the established Christ Church Episcopal, is a brilliant example of strategic resource selection within a hostile system. This is elite knowledge. Never use the system's own personnel for your revolutionary acts. The Christ Church minister would have been structurally obligated to report, resist, or nullify the marriage. Reverend Baker, however, operated on a parallel moral and institutional framework that prioritized a higher law, human dignity, over the system's law, chattel property.
He was a moral outlier, and Elizabeth targeted him precisely for his deviation.
A man obsessed with self-mastery must learn to identify and utilize the outlier nodes, individuals, organizations that operate on a different set of core values than the dominant culture. They are the cracks in the dam of the psychological control system. The hidden agenda wants you to believe that the official, authorized channels are the only channels. This is a lie. True power lies in knowing who to trust and who to bypass.
You must seek out the reverend bakers in your own life, the ethical experts, the aligned thinkers, the professionals whose moral compass points away from the institutional center. They are the ones who will perform your unauthorized ceremony of transformation and validate your personal sovereignty.